And something you said before, Carla, that resonated with me around not being fearful around what you want to write. Just write what's in your heart, what you feel like. And you even said that you even learnt from your students. So it's interesting that,
Yeah.
if you're open and receptive to ideas. Um, the reason why I raise this, because I've been sort of grappling with this idea for a little while now and sort of speaking to other authors around fiction versus non-fiction. And
Mm.
what is it about fiction that we all love, even though we know the characters are not real, we know the stories are not real, maybe influenced or inspired by real life events, but we know it's fiction, but we still become so invested in that. And I was grappling with this idea of some people might say, well, look, fiction is a lesser form of writing, that non-fiction is true writing because we're talking about true world events and what is it about fiction that appeals to people? And there was an author, Gary Disher, he's a quite renowned Australian crime author that I spoke to recently, and I asked him that question. And he said, well, you know what? The best way to reconcile this is that you write for yourself. And this goes back to what you said a minute ago, Carla, around having the courage to write what you want to write. He said, number
Mhm.
one, you write for yourself. Don't be overthinking around, am I going to get this published or who's my target audience? You start by
Mhm.
writing for yourself. And people who write are storytellers. And really, the essence of writing is the inherent desire to tell a story. And then you tell your story, whatever that story happens to be, and then you just write. And that underpins the whole process of writing is I want to tell a story. So he said, you write for yourself, and hopefully others will also like it. So instead of going into it with this idea of I'm writing for my reader, I'm writing to
Mhm.
try and hit a particular market to maximize my chances of being published, he said, stop overthinking it. And that was really good advice for me. Stop overthinking it. Start by writing for yourself. And then you'll enjoy the process. Writing will become a pleasure because you're writing what you want to write, you enjoy reading. And then you can think about the publishing side of things later. So how does that segue into what you said before around making that decision to write something that you wanted to write?
Yeah, I think that is fantastic advice personally. Because when we talk about audience, I feel like, and I've had, you know, people ask me, so who's your ideal reader? I decided to work with a publicist when I inherited a little bit of money and I decided to go ahead and invest in a publicist. And, she was asking me, who's your ideal reader? And in my head, me, I am my ideal reader, right? So let's just find a whole bunch of people like me, um, kind of nerdy people with weird, diverse background and different things. But yeah, I think uh, you have to write. I mean, it's just too hard, right? Like nothing's worse than like having to, and I'll tell you what will teaching first year writing, English composition, which I'm sure I'm not super familiar with the Australian higher education system, but I'm assuming Australian university students have to take writing. And before I got my full-time job, I worked as a college adjunct, which meant I was teaching at sometimes as many as four different universities every semester and driving around. And I taught a lot of first year writing classes. When I was in college, we called it was freshman comp. But and there's these kids they hate it. They just hate it. Like they don't want to be there. They um they just it's there's always like three or four kids in the class that really love to write and they sort of make it worth getting up and teaching the class, but everybody else is just like pulling teeth. So I think sometimes, Jack, to your point that, you know, we want everything to be perfect. We want everything to be just right. And so it's really easy to put a lot of pressure on ourselves as writers. And we forget that we're doing this because we love it. Um, and we're supposed to be able to have fun, right? When it gets to be, I mean, sometimes when you're working on your eighth revision or whatever, it's not that fun. But but at the end, it's like, hey, I've got a book, I've got a story, I've got something worth reading, so something worth sharing. So it's worth it in the end. But it in that initial creative process, and for me, the first couple of rounds of revision, actually, really the revising, like the first two rounds of revision, usually are the most fun for me because that's when I'm really just really figuring out what the story's about. Um, so yeah, I think that's fantastic advice. Yeah, because if you're not having fun, what's the point?
Mm.
I've been at conferences and I've had people ask me. I remember one time I had this woman ask me. She's like, "Well, how do you get your ideas? How do you make yourself sit down and write?" And I'm like, "I don't. Like, I don't have a problem. I have more ideas in my head than I will ever have time in my life to write." And I don't have to make myself sit down and write. I sit down and write when I want to.
Yeah.
If you have to make yourself do these things, maybe you should find a different hobby. Like, and I don't mean that to be mean and I don't mean to be dismissive, but it's like nobody says you have to be a writer, right? Maybe you would be much more happy like throwing pottery or painting or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
I understand that urge for people to want to create art and tell stories and do things, but it shouldn't be miserable.
Mm. Yeah, definitely.
I think that's great advice. I think we can get so lost in the business end once you've been published and you start sort of raising the bar in terms of your own expectations of publication and being a professional writer and all these pressures we put on ourselves. We've become, and I've been guilty of this, becoming so focused on marketing and social media and promoting my book and all this sort of stuff, cover design and everything else that goes, all the business end. Um, we forget about the fact that at the heart of what we're doing as writers is we are writing because we enjoy the process.
Mhm.
And if that part is painful, as you say, maybe it's not for you. I guess we all have times when it's a little bit more difficult when we're tired and we're
Oh
busy and
yeah.
when maybe you're writing towards a deadline. It can be a little bit more business minded, but yeah, I totally agree. And I've had periods where I've just stopped writing because I didn't have the
Mhm.
energy for it. But then I would kick on with a burst of energy and excitement because I had this idea that I wanted to write. So I think for me, we just got to remind ourselves that that's the fun of writing. It's the process, it's the writing, it's the getting all this stuff onto the page, and we can think about the publishing and all that stuff later.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because I've certainly, now that I have a book out in the world, I thought I knew a lot about the publishing industry. I mean, I run a publishing program and I have lots of friends who are in work in the publishing industry and yeah, but right, it's one thing in theory and something else in practice. And getting out there and having to pound the pavement, trying to get reviews, trying to do I mean, it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Um
Yeah.
and this is fun. These kind of things are fun. Like being able to
Yeah.
talk to guys like you. This is great. And I've gotten a chance to like write a couple of articles. I wrote an article for Electric Lit that was super fun. And um, but otherwise, it's just kind of like, you know, emailing back and forth with the library 10 times, trying to set up a meeting with a book club or whatever. It's a lot of work and it's very tedious.
I've got a question about
Absolutely.
higher education, and only
Mhm.
because I'm looking at I've been accepted to start a master's degree in creative writing next year. This will be the first time I've done this because I joined the police academy straight out of high school, 30 plus years in the police, never had a chance to go to university. So I'm coming into this late in life, but I'm really looking forward to just going there as a blank canvas to learn. So for someone like me or anyone else who's looking to go to university, college to study higher level creative writing, what would you say to them in terms of expectations around what can they expect to learn?
Yeah, so I was the same way. I went straight through I mean, I didn't go to the police academy. I wasn't a police officer, but um I I did 4 years of undergrad and then I did a master's degree in music. That was my early education and then spent 10 years trying to become a professional opera singer. That didn't really happen and then realized that maybe I wasn't doing it for the right reasons. Maybe I needed, like the advice I gave that woman, maybe I needed to find something else that was making me happy because singing was not making me happy at all. And I sort of found my way back to writing, which I had done quite a lot as a young person. And then after a while being in a writers group and doing all this other things, starting Philadelphia Stories, getting some work published and doing some things like that, I decided I wanted to teach. So I also went back and got my MFA in my early 40s. And um, I was terrified sitting in the classroom. Like I hadn't written a paper in 20 years. And here I was sitting in a Shakespeare class. I was like, what am I thinking? But it turned out great. And I personally, I mean, I love working with students at all levels and all ages. But I do think, because of my personal experience, I have a particular affinity for adult learners. So I think, and we have quite a few adult learners at Rosemont, that come back, people who have retired, um, people who, for whatever reason, decide they want to come back and learn how to be better writers. I think that's what you should expect. That hopefully, wherever you have chosen to go, you will have a good community of people around you that will be supportive. Um, and, you know, you'll, I always tell my students, the one advantage of being in a graduate program is like, this is your opportunity to like do whatever you want. Take all the chances, take all the risks. Like this is the time to do it. And just swing for the fences and, you know, whatever outrageous thing you want to give a shot, that's what you should do. Because you'll have people around you to support you, and you'll be getting feedback and you'll be able to figure out like what works and what doesn't work and who you are as a writer. I think is what is maybe one of the most valuable things that students learn when they're in an MFA program. And I think for adult learners, for younger students, uh, they have different ambitions, they have different goals. But when you're like 30, 40, 50, 60 years old and you've decided to go back to school, you have a very different mindset, right?
Mm.
And you you have different expectations, I know for me personally, money was always tight, so the money I was spending on my master's in creative writing, I wanted every penny's worth of education from my professors. Like if they let us go home early, I was mad. I wanted my 3 hours of class time. I wanted all the homework. Because that was my mindset. The younger students are always like, "Oh, you're letting us out early. Yay, see you later." Out the door. When I was the same way when I was their age. It's not like I'm mad at them because I was exactly the same way when I
Are,
was in my
are,
20s. I was,
are the American universities are they switching more to online stuff these days? Because a lot of the universities here in Oz, their lectures are being literally done online, and there's very little face-to-face contact time for the students. It's quite amazing.
yeah, that's a bummer. Um, well, it's interesting because I think COVID proved to everyone that you can do online education.
Yeah,
Um, and we obviously moved on to Zoom. We did everything like this, like we're having this interview. And I didn't hate it. It wasn't terrible because I at least got to see my students' faces. And in some ways, for the students who are more timid and less likely to talk in class, like they sometimes on Zoom felt more comfortable like sharing,
yeah.
for some reason, maybe because they were in the comfort of their own bedroom or office or wherever they were. Um, but face to face, like everybody really missed that. So
Mm,
the program I teach in is fully face to face.
that's good.
Now, our publishing program is completely online and it's asynchronous,
Mm,
which means the students just log on and do their work and get their grades. And then the next week they log on again and do their work. I'm not a huge fan of that. And
mm,
I have taught those kind of classes, and I'm also not a huge, I mean, it just wasn't my favorite. I,
mm.
I really like to have real, like, No, it's not the same as riffing off other people's ideas
Yeah.
and being inspired by what other people are saying and having that brainstorm like in the middle of a critique being like, "Oh, that's it." Like you figure it out and the author figures it out and everybody's like, "Oh, yay, we're geniuses." That's that's really hard to have happen even on Zoom.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's hard. So,
Yeah,
um
there's a lot to be said
yeah,
for face-to-face interaction and the conversations that might happen before and after class, and
Mm.
that the informal interactions is where a lot of the conversations come from, doesn't it?
yeah, absolutely. I was always that student that stayed after and talked to the professor when I know they wanted to go home. And I was
Carla, can
like,
we
"Really? Let's just stay here and talk for another hour. Is it okay? Do you mind?"
Carla, you mentioned before your background in music. Another question I wanted to ask you was the relationship between your music and your writing, and does your music in any way inspire your fiction writing?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I have always been inspired by music. Very early on, I remember probably the first real ekphrastic thing I wrote was an essay in high school, which was or junior high. That was high school, I think. It was a response to Mussorgsky's Night on Bald Mountain, and I just was writing about, I remember just putting the record on and yeah, because that's how old I am. We had records and listening to the record, probably because I can be a little bit obsessive and I will listen to things over and over again. Um, and then writing this essay and turning it in, and my English teacher was like, "Oh, what is this?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's my thing. It's my creative piece." Um, so yeah, I've always loved music and I've always been a writer. I kind of really started writing when like a lot of writers, after you first learn to read, you know? It's like, oh, I can put a couple sentences together and make a story. This is really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Started by writing poems and, really kind of describing imagery that was like affecting me emotionally, right? As a kid, that's about the extent of things. Um, and then as I got older, I experimented with short stories and screenplays and things like that. And I worked as a journalist as a high school student at our local newspaper. But I also really loved music.
Do,
And
out of
yeah,
interest, do you have the music playing in the background when you write, or does it have to be quiet?
no, I listen to music a lot, especially when I'm drafting.
Right.
And I tend not to listen to music with words.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I can write with
well,
classical music, but I can't write with anything with lyrics.
Mm.
or it can be lyrics in another language. So
I haven't
I've
tried
studied
that.
lots of other, yeah, I've studied lots of other languages, but I'm not fluent enough in any of them for the words to be distracting to me. So like
Yeah.
I could
Yeah.
listen to an opera, I could listen. I listened to a lot of German romantic music as I was writing um More Strange Than True, and especially the sections with the fairies. Um that I was very inspired by I don't know, I listened to like Ein Heldenleben and which is Strauss and actually part of the book, a big pivotal turning point in the book was inspired by Goethe's The Elf King, which is set to music by Schubert, is a very famous German art song. Um and so I was super stuck and I wasn't sure like how I was going to get to the ending, and I just listened to that song about 10 times in a row. And I just thought, okay, it was one of those things like where I tell my students is like, just go for it. Like, if it doesn't work, change it and do something else, but you'll
Yeah.
never know unless you try.
Mm.
So I just started writing. I was at like a little personal writing retreat, and I think I wrote maybe 60 pages that weekend. I think I finished the book or came really close to finishing it. And it was all thanks to Dietrich Fischer, Dieskau, and Franz Schubert, and uh, yeah,
So are you saying
the
that the
Elf King.
music almost unlocked something in your mind? It sort of open up sort of creative thinking.
Oh God, yeah, yeah, absolutely, all the time. I have another short story that was inspired by an ELO song called Mr. Blue Sky, which again I listened
Is-
to. I downloaded all of these different covers of it and like listened to it like for an it's just over and over and over again. It was very obsessive.
You're not on the spectrum at all, are you?
No, no. Um, certainly not my musical taste. Uh, yeah, so I listen to everything. I love jazz. And the main character, Jewel, in the novel, her father was a jazz musician. So there's quite a lot of references to jazz in the book as well. Um, so yeah, I find inspiration everywhere in music, and uh, it's funny because unless you've actually studied music formally, it's hard to understand. uh, I would tell people when I was getting my, friends of mine who are writers, I'm like, oh yeah, the reason I know about all these German romantic poets is because I sang them. Like
Right.
we
Yeah.
studied them. I had to translate this stuff because I was singing it. And so that's how I know Schiller and Goethe and, Eichendorff and all these other German romantic poets. Um, Otherwise, I would never have known them. And the things I learned of like the classical stories from mythology and everything from opera,
Mm.
so many of those stories, are just classic myths and other things. It just is fascinating to me. It's like, and I'm always sometimes surprised too, like how it kind of comes out in my work, what I will find as inspiration. So,
It's interesting with music. I can't do two things at once. If I have music in the background, particularly with lyrics, I'll start zoning out and listening to the music,
mhm.
and I'll probably start typing the lyrics on the page because my brain just can't do two things at once. But I wanted to talk about you've stepped us through your, I guess, your journey thus far and your music background and your studies and how you came to be teaching creative writing. But the question is, in relation to your debut novel, coming into that
Mhm.
sort of in a more mature phase of your life, like myself and
Mhm.
Harry, talk us through what it's like to be a debut author at this stage in your life.
Yeah, it's been challenging. Um and I don't know, in Australia, I mean in the United States there's a lot of like 5 under 35, 40 under 40, whatever. Like there's a lot of lists that really celebrate young authors. And that's great. That's fantastic. But you can be a young author at any age, right? It's not about a number. I have young authors that are in their 60s
Mm.
uh, because they're really just getting started. And to kind of dismiss them is not really fair, um, because in some ways they have the most to say. So for me, I kind of just I've had friends who say, oh, you were just so determined, and it was like, yeah, but I guess I just really didn't know what else to do. I was just going to keep writing, and I was just going to keep trying to get everything that I write published, and the I mean, I just didn't know what else to do, right? I wasn't going to stop. Because like, then what was I going to do? Like, sit at home and watch reruns? I do that enough as it is. So, um, you know, trying to get on people's radar. Um, as a woman, the book was published a month shy of my 62nd birthday. So I just, you know, this is something I've been trying to get accomplished since, I went back to school to get my MFA, since I was, I've been trying for 20 years to get a book published. So um, it just, sometimes you just have to keep pounding away at it. Um, And, there are venues out there now for older authors. uh, which is kind of great. So I'm glad to see more of that. One thing when I was still working at Philadelphia Stories, um, we would occasionally publish books, and we did an anthology to kind of counterbalance the, 40 under 40. We did an anthology called 50 over 50, and it was 50 women over the age of 50 included in this anthology. And that was pretty amazing.
Mm.
People were very, very into that. So, and it's a
I,
good anthology.
I've
So,
often said that for me, again, I didn't really start creative writing, you know, an operational police officer, and I didn't really have the time or capacity to be doing fictional writing. But I started writing as a bit of it was cathartic. It was a bit of self therapy. I didn't realize it at the time, but that's what got me started. But I've often said I started writing when I felt I had something to say, and that point in my life could only be achieved until I'd notched up a few scars and had some life experiences, and then I just again, it was just about unleashing all this stuff I was carrying around inside me. And I suppose for different people that happens at different stages of their life. What do you think about that?
yeah, no, I think that's absolutely true. I think that's absolutely true. Um, and to kind of go back a little bit to point you were making earlier about, why fiction and not nonfiction, and it's like nonfiction somehow nobler than
Mm,
fiction because it's true, right? Quote unquote true.
mm, mm,
My whole thing about fiction is, I have written some essays. I've had a couple of poems published. I do, dabble. I would never call myself a poet, but for me, I get at the truth through my fiction. And I feel like the best fiction does that, right? You can talk about the truth as a fiction writer in ways that you can't when you are tied to the actual truth, if that
Yeah.
makes any sense at all. Um, and I think also in genre writing, in particular science fiction, this is like the whole thing, right? This is like the best thing about science fiction is so much of the best science fiction is examining, you know, societal questions and, the environment. I mean, it's just all of these things, but it's wrapped up in this neat sort of fantastical futuristic story that makes it more accessible for people. They don't feel like they're being preached at, or, nobody's wagging their finger in their face, hopefully. It doesn't feel that way, but they can explore these other truths, right? These options, or they can see the what the future might actually look like, you know, if different paths are, depending on the choices that we make as a species. So I feel like yeah, that's how I feel about fiction. I just, for me, it is the truth.
mm.
So
My bookmark that I put out for my series of books and the like is my quote that I've got on it is the truth is often best told through fiction. So
mm,
Well,
guess we're of like mind then. That's good.
and I also talk
Yeah.
about author Neil Gaiman has a quote that says, fiction, or it's something to this effect, fiction is the lie that tells the most truth. And I often go back to
Mm,
that as well, around
yeah.
how we can, yeah, as you said, Carla, science fiction often, even though it's in a fantastical world and it's a lot about, it's escapism and entertainment and special effects, oftentimes there are some deeper themes around what does it mean to be human, for example.
hmm
And that can
hmm
be conveyed through the idea of science fiction. Speaking about science fiction, maybe even fantasy, something that another question I wanted to ask you about was research that you might do for those genres. Some people might think that's a bit of an oxymoron. How can you research fantasy and science fiction? But how does that play a part for you?
Yeah, I always do a lot of research. So I'm getting ready to write a new book, and I have the plan is to use historical figures as my characters. So I've been reading a lot of biographies. Um, I've been reading a book, so I do a lot of research for More Strange Than True. I read, that really great nonfiction book about dogs and dog behavior. I read Midsummer Night's Dream many times. Um, I listened to, as I said, I listened to a lot of German romantic music and came up with the climax of my book thanks to the Elf King. Um, and just sort of researching things, even though I live in Philadelphia, I wanted to make sure everything was right. Like, and most of the places that I wrote about in the book are real places. For instance, I had a really good friend who worked, there's a store, this will mean nothing to your listeners in Australia. Uh, but there in Philadelphia, there's a street that's kind of a funky street where there's a lot of f- fun shops and things like that. And there's a store called the Garland of Letters where they sell crystals and incense and lots of stuff. And I had a really good friend who worked there for a long time. And so I put them in the book. I put that store in the book.
Yeah.
Um, and I just wanted to make sure everything is right. Like for me, it's really important that if somebody knows Philadelphia, that I don't get it wrong,
Mm.
that I don't put the wrong street in the wrong place or the park in the wrong place or whatever. Because a lot of the action takes place in this dog park that's right on the river, that I ride my bike through quite a lot. So, um, yeah, so there was just a lot of that kind of stuff. So I do, and I'm one of those people that can fall down a research hole like really easily. Like, oh, I just got to look up this quick thing. And then like 2 hours later and 50, internet searches and, I'm printed out tons of stuff and I'm ordering books and I'm, whatever. Yeah, yeah,
And there's
it's,
all these emails from your students saying, "Haven't you marked my assignment yet?"
yeah, I know. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for sure. And then all I have to do is say, no, I'm doing research. And they're like, oh, okay.
Oh, okay,
They get it.
yeah.
Right. They're creative writing students. They get it.
Yeah.
Because they're much the same way. Um, but yeah, so I do quite a lot of research and for science fiction, like I am not a scientist. I
Mm.
am an artist. So like I'm reading this book on time travel and it started off really good. Now it's like getting really hairy and I'm like, I don't really understand all of this math, but I'm gonna just keep going and see where it takes me. Um, so uh I try,
Mm.
and then at the end I remind myself like, okay, time travel doesn't exist. So like you can just make stuff up, right?
Mm.
Like at the end of the day, you are writing fiction, especially when you're writing speculative fiction. It's like, oh yeah, you are incorporating elements like with More Strange Than True. Like this is all about magic. So you can do whatever you want, really. Like
Yeah.
as long as you follow your own rules,
Yeah.
right?
I
The
was
rules that you
just about to
create.
say
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. As long as you follow your own rules, you're totally fine. You can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's my whole research thing.
I wrote a novel that had elements of time travel, and I've got lost down that rabbit hole of quantum mechanics and
Hmm.
theory of relativity. And I was reading Albert Einstein's paperwork. I'm thinking I'm deep diving way too much because I wanted to make it at least believable. There are
Yeah.
so many different versions of time travel, whether it's Back to the Future or whatever. There's so many different takes on how time travel can occur, but I wanted it to at least be, palatable for people that would kind of scrutinize that idea.
Yeah. This summer when we were on vacation, I had kind of just started reading this text. It's not a textbook, but it's a book on time travel. And at the beginning, he was describing the different types of time travel, and he was using movies as examples.
Mm.
And the one example, which is kind of lines up with how I think about time travel, is Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. And so then I was talking to we were visiting with my sister and my nephews, and they're adults. And none of them well, my sister had seen Bill and Ted, but neither of my nephews had ever seen Bill and Ted. And it was Bill and Ted. Anyway,
You broke up a bit there.
yeah, I broke up. So, uh, we ended up watching Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure because I felt like that would be an appropriate way to explain my theory of time travel. Um, there's that
Did
scene
did
where it's
they
like,
get
oh, we need
it?
the yeah, yeah, they got it. It was like, oh, we need the key so we can break into the office. Oh, well, so in the future we have to remember to hide the key behind the sign. And then they go and look behind the sign and there's the key. It's like, oh, good, we remembered. So anyway.
My favorite is Austin Powers, the first Austin Powers movie, where they kind of confronted the idea of time travel and all the the conundrums that come with time travel. Can you be at two places at once and all that? And one of the characters kind of just looks at the camera and says, "Hey, look, don't overthink it. Just come on the ride with us and enjoy it." And then they went back to the story. So
Yeah, that's kind of where I've landed at this point. Like, and I haven't even started writing this book yet. I'm just like, okay, I'm gonna just do my thing and hopefully it'll make sense to people. I mean, you're along for the ride. Like if you are a Star Trek fan like I am, like time travel, come on. Right? You've seen kind of every version of it there possibly can be. So, for better or for worse, right? At some point you do have to ask the readers to just like suspend their disbelief and go along for the ride. So,
Mm,
yeah.
yeah.
definitely.
So we do have to start wrapping up. Time is getting away on us. But talking about your future projects, you said you do have something underway at the moment. What is that? Are you in a position to tell us or give us a sneak peek as to what you're writing at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually trying to find an agent, and I do have a new novel done. It's called Kaiju Island. So it's
Ooh.
very different than More Strange Than True. It's very much inspired by exactly what you might think, Godzilla and American films like King Kong and Attack of the 50-Foot Woman and things like that. So and it's very different in the tone and the structure than More Strange Than True. Again, this was something that kind of came out of my teachings. One class that I teach once in a while is called Content and Form in Fiction, and so we look at different ways that um, uh, fiction you can adapt different forms to help you tell your story. So things like interior Chinatown. Which is a novel told, written in the form of screenplay. Um, there's lots of great books out there. Beautiful Ruins, which has all different kinds of forms in it. So I was kind of messing around with that. So it's a non-linear book. There's footnotes. It's kind of a fake academic book. In that it's written by, it's got a scholarly introduction and it has footnotes, but I've used journal entries, field notes, drawings, stuff like that. And it was really, really fun to write. So we'll see what happens.
And do you
But
enjoy experimenting with new ideas in terms of different, not pigeonholing yourself in a particular genre that you can, jump out of one thing and try something different?
oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And the short story collection that I have that I'm trying to also sell at some point, hopefully, is all the stories are speculative, but they're all different. So like there's some science fiction stories like that the no novelette I was talking about earlier. That's very science fiction. But then there's one story in there that's very much inspired by Ray Bradbury. There's even like a quote from Rocket Man at the beginning of the story. There's an epigram, and another story that's completely inspired by um, Shirley Jackson, who wrote The Mystery of the Murdered Bride. Um, Actually, she wrote two versions of that story, but anyway. So yeah, I have yeah, I love to try different things. Yeah, I like it quite a lot actually.
Well, Carlos Spataro, thank you so much for your time. Good luck with the release and well, the release of your new novel, More Strange Than True. It's out now. So where can people find that? How can they get a copy of that?
Um, It's available on Amazon and barnesandnoble.com, bookshop.org. You can go to my website and find links to where you can buy it, cjspataro.com. Um, and
Cool.
in bookstores, yeah,
Terrific.
libraries.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a very enlightening conversation and good fun. So thank you so much for making the time. And we've had to coordinate the time difference. It's morning here. It's evening where you are. So it's been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to Harry and myself.
Thank you so much for inviting me. This has really been amazing. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been great fun. Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll say goodbye for now and all the best. Thanks everyone. Bye bye.